Welcome back to Stinging Back, the podcast that digs deep into the deceptive practices behind online stinging operations and the devastating impact they've had on real lives. I'm A, and today we are presenting the second part of last week's episode, The Cost of Entrapment, a conversation with P. So M said before he dropped off because his internet stopped working, he was talking about, he said even Joe Rogan called this out on his show, asking about how the government can justify entrapping its own citizens. And for us, this isn't theoretical. It's exactly what's been happening with these ICAC sting operations for many years. We're talking about state-created crimes, manufactured interactions, and yet the consequences are very real, lifelong, inescapable, and devastating.
And brought up the Rogan thing. My brother literally called me as he was driving home from work, as he had just listened to that podcast, and he's just like, dude, I just listened to Rogan talking about exactly what happened to you, except it was in the context of like political speech and AI agents. And, it's something that the average person, when you hear it framed as anything other than what's happening to people who are victims of these ICAC things, you see it as rightly insane, but your brain shuts off as soon as someone says, well, they were trying to have sex with a minor. No, they weren't. And there wasn't a real minor. And to bring it back to the libertarian non-aggression principle, like there was no harm, so there should be no foul.
Well, and that's what the problem is like they're hijacking people's emotions by claiming that you guys were trying to have sex with the minor. And I think that's why we need to change the narrative and point out the true facts that the government sexualized children and used that with a wild fantasy that they went around, they used that wild fantasy to promote and encourage the sexual abuse of children. So I think that's what the narrative should be. And that'll catch people's attention because that is actually the truth. We can prove beyond reasonable doubt that that is what the government has been doing. That is exactly what they do in these proactive sting operations. And people don't know that because we just had not said it that way before, but we are saying it that way now.
Yeah, and the thing you have to worry about is you give your rights away, and when you're giving other people's rights away, and like when you give other people's rights away, you're giving your rights away as well. So I'm sure there's going to be quite a few trolls in the comments, and I'm sure there's going to be people with legitimate questions as well. But if you're arguing to give the rights of people away who have been entrapped in these online things, you're paving the way for the government to do the exact same thing to your political speech. And if you think, oh, my guy's in the White House, so I'm going to be fine now, well, in 4 years, your guy might not be in the White House. It might be another regime in the White House. And maybe you're not so fine then. We have more in common, all of us, than we do that are our differences. We live in a media ecosystem, like you pointed out before, that feeds on fear, that feeds on breeding these little fissures in between us, when really, when you sit and talk to people, you find out they're not much different. Everybody said something they regret. Nobody's perfect. Should you have a life sentence pronounced on you for something you said? Absolutely not. And the idea that you can help one group, in this case children, by punishing another, in this case men, is absurd on its face. We know that you can't help one group by punishing another group. You have to uplift people. There are programs out there to help people who may be struggling with these thoughts, but they can't because, everybody's a mandated reporter, things like that. And the punishment is so harsh if you're ever found out. Like if somebody is actually struggling with these thoughts and actually wants to go meet a minor, they can't seek help because as soon as they seek help, they're going to be reported to the police and then their life is over. So you're actually, by over-criminalizing all of this, you're causing more harm to children.
Yes, because those people are not going to get help because of that. And let's talk more about the money and how much it's costing us. It's not just the harm it's caused our society, our country, our children, many families in this country. Um, it's cost us so much money. Let's talk about the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, the OJJDP. This was created under the U.S. Department of Justice to support efforts to prevent juvenile crime and victimization. So, yeah, that all sounds good on paper, but here's the reality. Since 1998, the OJJDP has awarded over $1.2 billion in federal grant money to these ICAC task forces and state attorney general offices, all under the banner of protecting kids online. Now, we've just told you all about how these proactive sting operations are not doing that at all.
Right, and that's funding for undercover software, decoy training programs, overtime pay, and of course, and especially, flashy media PR campaigns, because it's all got to be marketed as saving children. Everybody's a brand now, and that's their brand. And when most of these cases involve no child at all. And the ticker, right? So these funds, they're intended to protect real kids from real online predators, which of course we're not minimizing. There are dangers out there. That's including children being groomed, lured, sextorted by adults intending to exploit them.
But none of that is what these proactive sting operations are doing. In fact, sting decoys never behave like actual minors. Instead, they aggressively solicit sexual conversations, they demand sexual talk, and they initiate explicit chats with the men they target, often mimicking adult sexual behavior more than anything else.
So while real cases of child exploitation involving actual victims often go underfunded or ignored, millions are spent to manufacture fake crimes, to destroy families, and to claim headlines.
It's fraud. It's not just unethical, it's deceptive. You can't claim funds to protect real children and then use those funds to run decoy chat rooms pushing sexual content on random adults. That's not prevention, that's performance. And I said you can't just do that, but our government is doing that and is allowing vigilante groups to do exactly that.
It actually, now that I'm just hearing you say that, I read an article, I mean, I'm talking years ago now, after 9/11, how we went to a hyper security state in our airports, and anybody who's traveled via an airplane in the last 24 years can attest to the insanity that you have when you go through there, right? There's armed guards posted up everywhere, you're taking off your shoes, you're going through fancy scent detectors and all of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the term for all of that on the world stage is security theater, because none of it actually prevents anything. And when you're talking about this, that's the thing that just like came into my mind is security theater, because it's the illusion of security without actually providing security. When you could, for a fraction of the cost, actually keep kids safe, actually investigate these crimes, because I'm sure it's a small amount of people who are perpetuating large amount of crimes, but you're taking the so-called cheap way out, but really it's not the cheap way out, it's the easy way out.
Yeah, imagine not doing your real job and just pretending to be doing your job and getting paid a lot of money to just pretend to do your real job. That's exactly what is happening. We are paying the government to pretend to be doing their job. They're pretending to be keeping children safe online. And that's not at all what they're doing. In fact, these proactive sting operations have probably put children more at risk because those predators who are seeking minors online, I'm pretty sure they know very well that these proactive sting operations are keeping them safe because they know they're not targeting them. They're targeting men who are seeking adult casual encounters. They're not targeting
Yeah.
anybody who's seeking minors online.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. There's an argument to be made for like, well, why don't we redirect these funds instead of stinging the people who are in these adult, looking for adult sexual encounters or adult conversations? Why don't we redirect those funds? And if there really is this epidemic of 12, 13, 14, 15-year-olds on these sites, why doesn't ICAC try to sting them instead?
Exactly.
Because if there is if there is a kid who's really engaging in these high risk behaviors, that's a kid who needs help. And there are intervention programs to help kids like that. But you have to be able to identify those kids. Otherwise, they're just going to keep seeking it out. So if these kids exist, why are these funds not being spent on identification? Couldn't a cop just as easily play an adult man or an adult woman seeking a minor on these websites? And once they've identified that minor, couldn't they then refer them to protective services?
Well, Pete, according to these police officers who conduct these sting operations and the vigilante groups who also do them, it's very easy to find these kids. Just like you found one, it should be just as easy for them to find them too, because apparently these kids who do this just come out and tell any random stranger they meet in these places that they are a minor. They're very easy to identify. They are going to aggressively push sex on you. They will refuse to meet you unless you agree to sex with them, and you have to specifically tell them what you are going to do to them. And only then will they agree to meet you. And they want you to know that they are a minor. This is how you identify them. They're so easy to identify. I have no idea why law enforcement has not found any of these kids in these places. Apparently, there are
It's
many of
wild.
them, and they're easy to find because thousands of men across the country have found them, according to them.
It's just wild. Yeah, and it defies all logic, and it's a systemic issue because all we know how to do is punish people in this country. God forbid our government try to help people in this country. But yeah, no, they're everywhere. I guess all those ads online. Those local singles in your area, right? It's local minors in your area, I guess. But it's sad as someone who has been through this and who does genuinely care about like welfare of people in general. Like part of my thing. Like we could be helping these kids, and if there are kids out there who are doing this, I would love to see them get the help. The fact of the matter is, what's happening right now is not helping kids. It's not prevention. It's not prevention. It's just pre-crime. If you've ever seen Minority Report, that's what a lot of my friends compare this to with me. They're like, you got pre-crimed, you got Minority Reported.
I think realistically, the only real minors that are going to be in places like this might be the ones who are exploring their sexuality, like um, they are unsure if they are, straight or gay, so they might go onto, one of these gay platforms because there just isn't anything for minors out there who are struggling with sexual identity. So I can see those minors going to these adult LGBTQ places to meet others like them. But those minors are posing as adults to get into those places. And I feel pretty certain that these minors are not pushing sex aggressively on any random strangers that they meet there, like they do in these proactive sting operations. And those minors are also not likely to tell random strangers they meet there that they are a minor because they just went out of their way to present themselves as an adult to even be there. That's like a minor sneaking into a bar and then just announcing to random strangers they meet in there, oh, by the way, I'm a minor and I really need you to know that. I need you to acknowledge that I'm a minor. Will you please go buy me a drink now? That's equivalent to what they are doing in these sting
Yeah.
operations. I'm here to solicit sex from you. And by the way, I need you to know that I am a minor. I want you to be okay with that. Okay, now tell me what you're going to do to me. Okay, now come over and let's do it. That's exactly what's happening. And so it's just not realistic. There is no such thing as any real minor that is pushing sex aggressively on random adult strangers. Not online, especially not
Yeah.
online. It's insane. There are what they are talking about is the minors, that feel neglected and they want attention. They might go on there looking for attention. They're not looking for sex. They're looking for attention. That's very different. And that's, what has not been, that's where the lines have been blurred. Oh, but there are minors on adult dating sites. Yes, but they're not aggressively pushing sex on anybody. That's what needs to be clarified.
Sorry to say, it should not be a state problem. Like that's a parent problem. And it's I mentioned this in the last meeting, but like we have a problem in this country where parents want to have kids, but they don't want to have the responsibility of having kids. A lot of parents, and no offense to any parents who are listening to this, if you're not this type of person, I'm not talking about you. But there is a loud contingent who wants the state to parent for them, whether it is personalizing instructional, like getting books banned from bookstores and libraries because little Johnny or Susie, their poor little eyes might see them, or this content online. It's your job as a parent to make sure your kid is not going on a website you don't want them to go on. It shouldn't be the state's job to police adult websites and adult interactions on the off chance that a kid is going on them. Like that's just not acceptable to me.
That's very true. And remember, they are also depending on states that have sexualized children, states that are telling you that because children get bored and feel neglected, that makes them want to seek out sex from random adult strangers online. This is who you are trusting your children to, to raise your children, to protect your children. People in the state are sexualizing your children, claiming that your children are wanting sex from random adult strangers. And if you don't believe me, look into these proactive sting operations. This is what they do, and this is what they have told us that real children are doing. They say it could have been a real child. Children do go to adult dating sites, but you need to read those conversations. And I'm talking about the unedited versions, not the edited versions, because they do delete some of those messages to show, to hide that they were aggressively pushing sex on them. Tell them to show you which websites they posted their ads on or created their accounts on. If you go there directly yourselves and you open those websites, you will see that there are a lot of adult content pictures there. So nobody is there by accident. This is not some teen that wandered on there accidentally, not realizing what it was. Everybody in those places are there on purpose, and they are there for the purpose of soliciting a casual encounter. And in these sting operations, they can lie to you and say that, oh no, we presented ourselves as someone who was just seeking friends. No, they did not. In fact, they always they punish the wrong responses. If it's not about sex, they're not interested. They threaten to move on. And then when they give you clues that they are looking for sex, and when the men respond positively to those clues, then they pounce on that and they reward the men for it. And suddenly they're very warm and they're available. Yes, when can you come over? Let me go shower. It's very clear that they're looking for sex. So do not be fooled by them and let them tell you that they presented themselves as a regular teenager. That's not it at all.
And I think like my answer to well, what if it was a real minor? Like, because I've heard that, in some of the comments, right? What if it was a real minor? It wasn't.
It wasn't.
Get over it. Like, it wasn't a real minor.
It never would have been. It was not a real minor. It never would have been. If it was a real minor, the real minor would have stopped responding, would have blocked them, would have said, some smart alecky stuff. They would not have said, oh no, you need to tell me first what you're going to do to me, and then I'll give you the address so you can come do all that stuff to me. Now that is a wild fantasy these people created.
Yeah, you wouldn't, if you speed through a school zone, you're going to get a ticket, right, for speeding through a school zone, but they are not going to charge you for attempted murder, because what if it was a real minor who was crossing the street when you were speeding? I'm sorry, that's just not a thing in any other law. But people, again, they turn their brains off because they think that they're trying to protect real kids when they're really not. And, then the other argument that I've seen, right, is that, well, these people aren't going, so they obviously think it's a real minor, or they obviously have an intent to do this. Well, I didn't go, right? So that destroys that argument right there. I didn't go. I stayed in my house. I knew it was an adult. and I'm still on the sex offender registry for life. So if
Well,
that doesn't give you pause, then I don't know what will.
and what's really crazy is that the government is claiming that they have proved beyond reasonable doubt that all of these men believed it to be a minor. Now, these laws clearly state that the men had to believe it to be a minor. At most, a man in a situation like that, that was put in that situation, at most, they can only believe it could be a minor. Some of them might think, well, maybe it is a minor. I'm going to go check this out. This is really wild and crazy. I've never seen anything like this before. I've never even heard of any minors doing this, but they keep saying that they're a minor. Not sure why they, want to continue telling me that they're a minor, even though they're not acting like one. I want to go check this out. I'm not going to believe it until I see it with my own two eyes. And so at most, they could only believe that it could be. The law does not say they believed it could be a minor. The law says they believed it to be a minor. The problem is that these men did not observe this profile or this ad or account that they responded to and decide for themselves, oh, look, here's a minor. I'm going to reach out to them. And then I'm going to start talking sexually to them. The men reached out to those profiles or those accounts or those ads because the decoy presented themselves as an adult who was seeking a man to meet for sexual purposes, to engage in sexual conversation, to invite to meet for casual sex. That's what they always present themselves as to begin with. They establish that first. Once they have the man hooked and it's understood that this conversation is about you and I hooking up, and we're going to talk about what we're going to do. Only after that, they bring up the age. Oh, and by the way, I'm 14. I hope you're okay with that. Is that okay? Those things just don't go together. And so, of course, that's going to create confusion. At that point, it does not matter how old they claim to be, who they claim to be. It could be a talking cat. It could be a mummified corpse. It could be an 80-year-old with dementia. The fact is that the decoy solicited the man for sex. That is what matters. It's not going to be anything else other than an adult who's looking for sex and is role playing, or a catfisher, or a sting operation who's looking to set up men to create fake child predator cases to get funding. That's it. It's never going to be a real minor. So at that point, it doesn't matter how old they claim to be. So this BS, oh, but you were told this was a 14-year-old. Yeah, I was also shown this was someone looking for sex. That needs to keep getting brought up in these cases.
So it's something I've been thinking about because, right, again, this is the only thing where someone tells you online and you have to believe them according to the law. Like, it is illegal almost for you not to believe when someone says they're underage, right? So I
Exactly.
guess a question that I'd love to hear an answer to, and if there are any lawyers in the audience, if you could give me this answer, or if you could post it in the comments, I'd love to hear it. Like, could a police officer give a lawful order via a text message app like that? So, and the reason I ask is because if a police officer couldn't give a lawful order over a text message app like that, then what's the reason they can't give a lawful order? Well, naturally, it would follow a police officer can't give a lawful order over a text messaging app because you have no way to verify that that's a police officer. So if someone tells you, come out, we're serving you a warrant, we have guns trained on you or whatever, you would not be expected to do that over a text messaging app. But you are expected to believe that the person is 14 years old. And it just gets to that, like, this is the only type of thing where we would allow that to happen, but it's paving the way now for government access in other areas, especially with the upcoming use of AI, which is something that really should worry everybody across the political spectrum.
Well, it's common sense that you would need to show up and see them in person, observe their physical appearance, observe their behavior in person, and only then can you truly believe if this is really a minor, because it could
Yeah.
be someone who really is not a minor, but they actually look like it in person and they act like it in person, then at that point you can believe that it's a minor. But it would still not make sense that they're pushing sex aggressively on a random stranger. At that point, it would be, I guess, a psychopathic minor. Like there's something wrong with this person. And what if a minor were to sexually assault an adult? Would the adult be
I don't think that's
prosecuted?
possible.
Well,
I actually don't think that's possible.
it has happened. I did find a case once where a minor did sexually assault adult women, and he was
Oh,
prosecuted.
okay.
He was prosecuted for sexually assaulting them. So it is possible. The women did not get prosecuted for, being victimized by the minor. So it can happen. And that's what's interesting about this, that in these cases, they're presenting themselves as minors who are very sexually aggressive. So it's like, what if the man shows up and gets and is sexually assaulted by this minor, pretend minor, right? Imaginary minor. Let's not, you know,
Right.
uh, I'm not saying that a real minor would do this. In fact, it is our government who has said that a real minor would do this, but I'm playing into their fantasy. This minor was very sexually aggressive online with this random stranger. So why wouldn't they do something like that in person? Right? I'm just adding to their fantasy what they're claiming an actual minor would do. It's that
Yeah, and I
crazy.
think what you're hitting on is absolutely like how tricky it can be when you criminalize sex in general, which is, what this is for lack of a better term. Like, and it's just everything gets so murky, and it ends up harming people. It's harming everybody, right? It's harming you, the taxpayer, because you're paying, and we're talking billions of dollars per year out of your taxes, and that's going to come from your property tax. That's coming from payroll taxes for Medicaid, Medicare. That's coming out of your the taxes you pay in your groceries, your sales tax. It harms, obviously the victims like myself and other people, our families as well. And it harms the children who it's meant to protect because it's diverting resources from protecting children. I think it was on a Zoom call or not a Zoom call, I was dialed into it on my phone. Um, but I think it was with you guys that someone you had gotten to speak had mentioned that in a lot of these states that are doing this, these tip lines that are set up to tip people off about actual child exploitation,
Mhm.
something to the terms of over like 90% of the tips are going not investigated. And it's because they're devoting all these resources to these sting operations. So you're
Right.
hurting the kids who it's allegedly supposed to protect.
Right. The organization that claimed this said like 99% of the tips were being uh, were not being investigated, and that it was because of a lack of resources. So of course that really set us off because we know that there have been millions of dollars spent on, these proactive sting operations that create the fake crime and protect no real children. And so that really hit a nerve with us. Real children out there continue to be victimized, and the public is made to believe that it's because there are no resources um, to take care of that, to address those real problems. And we're sitting back watching all of this happen, millions and billions of dollars, right? By the time we put all these people through the system, it's billions of dollars that have been wasted on a fantasy.
Yeah, and another thing I found out while I was going through all this is like when they rent these decoy houses and things like that, like mine ended up being like a rented house that they did it out of. Obviously, I didn't go, so I had no idea, but I was told by my lawyer after the fact that they go around and they tell all the people, you're not allowed to take photos, you're not allowed to take videos, and certainly that protects the people who are, being arrested. But I also wonder if there's a more sinister motive because if you if you were to take photos and videos of, like, let's just take mine as an example, you would have seen over 140 officers, assorted patrol cars, paddy wagons, and things like that there to catch people who were showing up. And that kind of directly contradicts the lack of resources. If you've got 140 officers that can go and just sit around for 3 days to catch, let's say, 10 people, then I really don't think you're suffering from a lack of resources. I just think you're suffering from piss poor management.
Yeah, and to catch 10 people, you mean more to entrap 10 people, to create a fake
Yes,
crimes around
to
10
entrap 10
people.
people.
Yeah, it's and the public doesn't know that.
So
And the public needs to
the
know
next
this.
time you, yeah, the next time you, the public, like you listeners, hear a story like this and they're talking about how strapped for resources they are, I would love for you to picture, a little parking lot filled with 140 some cops twiddling their thumbs on a cell phone, sending text messages to entrap a bunch of dudes, and all of the assorted paraphernalia that comes with that, all the cars, all the trucks, and why there aren't pictures of this stuff. The only recordings that they have of these are their body cam, are the cops' body cam footage.
Yeah.
That's
And
it.
all of the
You're not allowed to take
hours
pictures.
and all of the hours they spent on these adult content platforms. Who knows what else they were doing there? They probably go on there and solicit, you know, people for themselves as well. I'm telling you, you guys need to go on these hookup sites that these proactive sting operations are conducted on. Some of them are straight up pornographic sites. And this is our government is claiming that this could have been a real 14-year-old that created an account and went to this platform and solicited men to meet. And I'm talking men who put their pictures out there, um, explicit pictures. I don't know if I could say it on here. We
Yeah,
have
and
said so many other words that'll probably be beeped. But this, and they don't show this in court. When they prosecute these cases, they don't show that. They pretend like it's a regular site that the kid was just hanging out on, just looking for friends, and this evil predator targeted this kid and started talking sexually to them because they knew it was a kid. Nothing like that at all in the real in how these proactive sting operations work at
yeah,
all.
I mean it's performance, and if you think that it's just people who are going to the stings, like they're getting arrested, and so they deserve for getting arrested, well, then there's me who spent a sum total of like exchanged, a few messages over the course of 6 to 8 hours, and got arrested in front of his family for not going anywhere.
Yeah.
It's not just people who go; it's innocent people. It's well, anyone who goes is also innocent because it is entrapment, but it's just criminalizing any type of behavior that the government wants to now, and it's all just a performance. It's not keeping anybody safe.
Yes, I have spoken to a lot of men who have been entrapped in these sting operations. And some of them just go on there, never even had an intention of meeting anybody. They just go on here to engage in these fantasy sexual conversations just to blow off steam or whatever, to pass the
Yep.
time, whatever. And they never intended to meet anybody, even if they hadn't been told, that this was a minor. They were still not going to show up to meet anybody. They just wanted to engage in the fun fantasy sexual conversation and then move on and, maybe at another time come back and engage in another one of those conversations. And that's what some people do. But our government has now criminalized that. Our government has interjected itself in the private sexual lives of consensual adults. And there's a real problem with that.
Yeah, and that brings us back to the beginning, right? Whether you're left libertarian or right libertarian, or I don't know if there's a centrist libertarian, who knows? I'm sure there's a radical centrist libertarian out there, but this should just chill you to your bone based on like just the core principles of manufactured crime, state overreach, and violations where there's no victim and people are serving 10, 15, 20-year prison sentences for crimes with no victim. And I mean, libertarian or not, any American, that should really just kind of chill you to your bone that we're doing this.
Yeah, and when we sit down and talk to people one on one and walk people through the logic and the cost and the ethics, they get it. This is scam justice.
Yeah.
This is not about protecting kids.
And I think that's the good news, right? If there's anything here that you can take away if you've been a victim of these stings, um, the good news is that like people do get it, and more people are starting to get it because the absurdity of the overreach is just getting, it's almost comical at this point. I've had the majority of my friends in the wake of this be very supportive. And if any of you are out there listening, I thank you for that. It means the world to me. I wish that more people would be supportive of the people who have been entrapped in this, because you hear some heartbreaking stories about people whose families have abandoned them, whose friends have abandoned them, and who are really like, if they haven't committed suicide yet, are thinking about it. And that's a tragedy because they didn't do anything wrong, and their lives have been ruined.
It's really sad. I mean,
Yeah, it crosses political lines. It's a criminal justice issue. It's a constitutional issue. It's a fiscal issue. It's a family values issue. Our leaders need to stop blindly writing checks for these systems that manufacture crime. Stop funding the criminal industrial complex.
yes, because this isn't how we keep kids safe. It's how we waste public money, how we betray the trust of donors and erode civil liberties, one sting at a time.
Absolutely. So if you're listening, make sure you do your own research, follow the money, share the facts, and demand answers.
So, what are the key takeaways?
So I think libertarian values as a whole, opposing government manufactured crime and state overreach. We can see that through the non-aggression principle. That's a huge takeaway. But I think in general, right, people oppose crimes with no victims being criminalized like this. The cost, right, per person, $660,000. We're talking over a 10-year incarceration period, and that's just incarceration. Then you've got your post-release supervision, which is costing states annually per person $5,000 and $15,000. The sex offender registry, which is just a beast in and of itself, right, costing hundreds of millions annually without scrutiny. And it's ran so slipshod that nobody really knows what's going on there. As you mentioned, the federal grants exceeding 1.2 billion that are being misused to create fake crimes instead of preventing real exploitation. The online threats that are actually happening, like grooming, luring, sextortion, that are really not being addressed by these proactive stings. These proactive stings don't address and get help to at-risk children. They're just trying to punish people. Decoys and stings initiate demand sex talk. They behave nothing like minors. They're mirroring adult behavior. And I think public awareness is key. We've been fed a lie, and I include myself in that before this happened, that, this is just one person sending text messages, like, really working hard to save the kids. It's just not the truth. It is a billion-dollar industry. It spawned its own YouTube channel.
Mm-hmm.
And then the total estimated cost is just, again, bring it back, right? We're talking operation, investigation and conviction, 10-year mandatory sentence. Like, you have the sting, you have the trial, you have a 10-year federal prison sentence, probation and supervised release, which, again, just to remind you, in some states, supervised release for these crimes can be for life. And then a lifetime sex offender registry. We're talking per person between $550,000 and $970,000 and above, depending on how long this person lives. So you could be dropping $1 million on a person, that's taxpayer dollars, on a person for a victimless crime. And you're telling me that's the only way to protect the kids. You're a liar. You're a goddamn liar.
And remember, this has been done to thousands of men across the country for many years since the early 2000s. So that is a lot of money, our money, that has been spent on this wild fantasy that the government created.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be curious to know the numbers, because it's got to be a lot. And they're doing these operations, it seems, with increasing frequency.
It's insane. We need more people paying more attention to this and start calling out our government on this. This needs to stop and this needs to be corrected.
If you have been affected by this, write your legislature. It starts with conversations. Don't be afraid to talk.
And that is a wrap for today's episode. Until next time, keep questioning, keep digging, and keep stinging back. And before you go, a quick reminder to check out some vital resources. Visit the Lady Justice Smith blog for more on exposing these injustices. Watch ICAC Unpacked on YouTube for deep dives into these sting operations. Join our community on Facebook at United Citizens Against Government Entrapment US. That's spelled UNCAGEUS. And don't miss the new YouTube channel, Just Played. That's JESTPLAYED, where they share revealing clips and commentary and satire. That is a new YouTube channel. We are looking forward to their content. And be sure to subscribe to the Substack, The True Cost of Proactive Online Child Sex Stings, for investigations, data, and insider analysis.
We'll include all the links in the episode description. Thank you for listening, and remember to spread the word and challenge what you think you know.
Stay aware, stay informed, and always keep stinging back.